I've been in a reading slump for so long, it's starting to get really fucking annoying. So I was googling like tips because I'm just desperate, and I came across this epicreads.com list of tips to get you out of a reading slump. So I decided to try them. The first tip they offer is read your favorite book again. This is the simplest and usually the most efficient cure for a reading slump. Let the book that sparked your reading curiosity spark it once more. Reading an old favorite is the #1 solution recommended by our Year of Epic Reads book club community. What a trustworthy source. So I actually did this tip already. The first book I read is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, because this is basically my favorite book. I think about it all the time. I have to admit, it did start out rather slow this time, but it slowly picked up and I got really into it. I just love this book. I tend to read it every 4 years for some reason. Like, it's never planned, but I just happen to pick it up every 4 years. This is a story of Esther Greenwood, who is beautiful, intelligent, successful, but slowly having mental breakdown. Which, I mean, you can't blame her. I love this book. I read it every 4 years for some reason. I don't know why, because I don't plan to do that. It just happens. But every time I read it, I get something new out of it. I'm underlining new quotes. It's honestly like a great experience, and I love this book so much. As to this tip, I actually think it really helped. I mean, by the time I was like halfway through the book, I was really into it, and I read the rest of it really quickly. I felt like it helped with my reading slump, and it made me want to read more books. Which I think makes sense, because like, it's your favorite book for a reason. You know, like, of course you're gonna like reading it again, especially if it's been some time since you read it. But so far, the Year of Epic Reads book club community has not let me down. The next tip I followed was tip number 6, read a book that inspired your favorite author. Epic Reads says, reading books that inspire the authors you love is a good way to branch out while still staying in comfortable territory. It will allow you to see where your fave author's inspiration comes from, and if it inspired the author you love, chances are it might inspire me. Spoiler alert, I was not inspired. The book I picked up for this one is The Iron King by Maurice Durand, I think. I picked this book up because George R.R. Martin loves it, and he said before that it was the inspiration for Game of Thrones, which sounds cool, which gives you high expectations, right? Terrible book. I'm putting that in before I even describe the book. It's bad. So this book follows Philip the Fair, who rules his country with an iron fist but can't govern his own family. And for most of the book, you're following this scandal where 2 princesses are cheating on their princes, and it's a whole big thing, but that gets resolved like 3/4 of the way in, which is a weird point to resolve it. And then after that, all of a sudden you're supposed to care about this like war that was never talked about before. I just could not get into this. It had really bad writing. It was all tell, no show. The characters were really flat and lacked any dimension. They were really stupid, and I couldn't get interested or care about any one of them. They just weren't fleshed out at all. And honestly, it was a torture to read. Like, it's a small book, but I hated the experience of reading this book. As far as the tip, like, I don't think it's a bad tip. I actually think it's a cool idea to go and look at what books your favorite authors like and like read those. It makes sense. But this book is just a bad book. I don't know if George R.R. Martin has bad reading taste, and I think maybe he does after this. But like, maybe I should have gone for another author that I like a lot and chosen one of their books. So this was a bad experience. This tip has let me down, and now it's kind of tied with like 1 good tip, 1 bad tip kind of. So we'll see where it goes from here. The next tip I tried was tip 15, read a short book. The description for this one says, no one said every book you read has to be a long one. Pick a novella or a short story and see if that starts your reading fires again. The book I chose for this one is Before We Were Free by Julia Alvarez. This book follows a young girl, Anita, who's 12, and she's living in the Dominican Republic in the 60s. And throughout the book, she finds out that her parents are involved in a plot to overthrow the dictator. This book was really interesting because I know nothing about the Dominican Republic and its history, so I liked picking up on that a little bit. I think it was helpful that it was told through the eyes of a 12-year-old too, because obviously I don't understand the context of why the dictator, or like what he did, why he was overthrown, so it helped to like be reading from a young person's perspective as they're figuring that out for themselves as well. It's a very short read. It's under 200 pages. And as far as the tip goes, I think that reading a short book when you're in a reading slump actually really helps, because it's fast to get through and you have like a sense of accomplishment that makes you want to pick up another book. So I definitely think that this tip is worth it, and I ended up giving this book 3 stars. The last tip I tried was tip number 3, read a book you think you won't like. There's freedom in reading a book you think you won't like. No expectations and no guilt if you stop. It's just you, a book, and the potential to get your read on, because that's a thing, right? For this tip, I chose Order of Darkness by Philippa Gregory. This book follows our main character, Luca, who's kind of brought into this secret order whose goal is to protect Christianity, which is kind of weird. The reason I thought I wouldn't like this book is because, first of all, I've read Philippa Gregory before. I've only ever read her like historical fiction, and I did think this was going to be a fantasy. But I've never been a big fan of her historical fiction. Like, I liked reading it to learn about the history, but I never was a big fan of her writing style or anything else about her books. I will say it ended up not being as bad as I thought. First of all, it isn't really a fantasy. It's basically a historical fiction. It's set in like the 1400s, I think. It doesn't say in the back. There are some like mystical elements to it sometimes, but rarely. Again, I did like it more than I thought I would. I just thought it was like a fun, quick read. There wasn't really much to it substance-wise. It was just like a nice ride. I will say it felt kind of typical YA in the sense that I could see where everything was going. There was no surprise in the plot for me. I thought everything was very obvious from the start. But it was fun. I gave it 3 stars. As far as the tip though, I think it's a really bad tip. I mean, I was lucky that I ended up actually liking this book, but if I had a book on my shelves that I genuinely thought I wouldn't like, and I was in a reading slump, I feel like reading that would just put me in a worse slump. There's nothing worse than like trying to get through a book just to finish it when you're not liking it. I don't think their reasoning about expectations makes any sense at all, because why would you read a book you would think you wouldn't like when there's a book you think you would like right there? All in all though, it ended alright. I don't know if I said this yet, but I gave this book 3 stars. So this was a fun little adventure. I think most of the tips were fine. The reading the short book stood out to me. The reading your favorite book was definitely a good one. And I think the reading a book that inspires your favorite author has the potential to be a really, really good tip. I just need to find a different author to choose their favorite book. My reading slump isn't totally gone though. I can still feel it there, but I do feel like it's gotten a bit better since starting this challenge. So it seems like there is some merit to some of these tips at least. But yeah, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you later. Bye!